Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Now it is time to introduce our main speaker for tonight, Stevie G.
I'm Stevie, I'm an alcoholic. I'll start out telling you what today is like before I get to what it was like before. I had to go to the dentist. I had cracked a tooth yesterday, and I went to the dentist, and they were looking at the decay underneath the tooth, and he said that it had reached the nerve, and so he called the endodontist, the root canal doctor, who was a few miles away, and that person had already left for the holiday weekend. God only knows what a root canal doctor does for entertainment. Probably inflicts pain for free. So, you know, I had, it was the lower tooth, the lower tooth, so that means that the Novocaine numbs half of my face, half the cheek, half the tongue, half the lips, and I was drooling and in pain, and the dentist said, well, I said, you know, I have to, this is how I put it, I have to speak publicly tonight at 8 o'clock. I didn't say 8:45, that would have been a little too precise. So I said, I have to speak at 8 o'clock, and he says, well, there's good news and there's bad news. And, you know, let me just say about that expression, people say it all the time. My dentist said it today. When I hear someone say there's good news and there's bad news, I say, hey, I'm an alcoholic, give me the bad news twice. And he says, the good news is that by 8 o'clock, the Novocaine will have worn off. The bad news is that it's going to be throbbing by then. So since you have to speak, what I'm going to do is prescribe you some codeine. Or, if you're allergic, I'll give you some Vicodin. That's all I fucking need. So, so I'm going to ask for the hands of the heroin addicts with less than 30 days who might still be carrying tonight in case I need a little something before. In the midst of trying to not spit up blood this afternoon, I also got a call from a friend who told me this crazy story. This has nothing to do with AA. I just have to mention it because it only happened a few hours ago. She told me that she had been harassed by some cops today. She was just walking, not really doing anything, but it was in an area where there had been some crime, and I said, well, and they seemed extra aggressive based on her story, and I said, well, were you giving him a hard time? And she goes, no, the bipolar opposite. I said, I didn't want to correct her. I figured that would be unkind. Anyway, that has nothing to do with anything. It just happened today. I feel like I'm speaking kind of a little thick maybe, but okay. This is great. You know, the Secretary Jerry is at the International Convention, so it's kind of like I'm the substitute teacher. You guys can really fuck off tonight. The one thing about the International Convention, I went in '95 because it was in San Diego, and I thought, if I can't do that for Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not going to get any closer unless it's in my living room. So I went there, and the one thing that I always find very moving, this is probably the only serious thing I'm going to say all night, is that, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous celebrates its birthday on June 10th every year. And the reason for that is that June 10th, 1935 was the permanent date of Dr. Bob's sobriety. Not Bill's, who had gotten sober in November of 1934. And Bill always felt it was important that we date our date from the second time that the date that the second guy got sober. And you know, to me, that's a really moving legacy, because I'm involved in a lot of organizations, professionally and otherwise, and you know, none of them are based on the other guy, the second guy. It's always the first guy that had the idea, the first guy that got the copyright, the patent, whatever. It's always the first guy whose scheme it was, not the second. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, I feel that's the legacy, is that it's always the second guy. It's always the way to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. I will tell you that my sobriety date is January 11th, 1986. I do not come from an alcoholic family. I'm so not from an alcoholic family that when my father was living in Northern California some years ago, and he came down to LA, and he went out to a dinner, and when I spoke to him after the dinner, he said that, I asked him how it was, and he said, oh, it was great. And he said, Steve, you know, there was something that was really great that I had for the first time. It's called O'Doul's. You know about O'Doul's, Steve? And I said, yeah, it's non-alcoholic beer. And he goes, well, you know what's fantastic about it? You get the taste of the alcohol, but none of the effects. And I looked at him like, am I adopted? So this is just to say I believe that there's a genetic component, I suppose, in some people. In my particular case, I'm a self-made man. I'm the alcoholic of the liquid variety, the powdered variety, the solid variety, and when there's sufficient flame, I like it all gassed up too. So if I pepper my discussion with words like heroin and cocaine, it's just to tell you precisely what happened to me, and that is what in my case I started. You know, this is like right out of chapter 3. In my case, I started only on the weekends. I then, after a while, I started drinking and using on Friday, because I'm from New York, and in New York, a lot of people, particularly now, you know, particularly during the summer, would take off early, go to Westchester, go to the island, and so for me, that would be my way of getting a jump on the weekend. So I use Friday now, Saturday and Sunday, but not the other days, and then that led to me using on Monday, because getting involved in the week was always a little difficult for me, and then I started using Monday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but not Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And it sounds so ridiculous, but that's, you know, that's what happened. And then I found that at some point the invisible line for me is when alcohol became a solution and not a problem. And I mean, I know it brings its own problems too, but it was a solution. And but I didn't want to do it every day, so I thought of a great plan, which was I'll use on Wednesday. So that meant Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but not Tuesday and Thursday. And then I had a list of why I should use on Tuesday and not Thursday, and another one on Thursday but not Tuesday. And you know, at that point I was getting loaded every day. And so it took about a year from the time that I was drinking only on weekends till the time it was every day. Then I had another plan. What I would do is I would make deals by myself, with myself, and arbitrate whether or not a particular action that I took was a violation of the rule I already set, and then I'd move the bar slightly away. And you know, the best definition of an alcoholic I ever heard is a person who sets impossibly high standards for themselves, and when they fail to reach it, sets it even higher. And This is because, you know, constantly in turmoil, constantly not okay. And then I had another thing which was not to use at the office, only at home, and that didn't work very well. And then I had another one which is, you know, there was a time where I like to drink among people. It's funny, a few years ago, I was at the my older son graduated from preschool a few years ago, and we were at a party at one of the parents' houses, and it was very nice, very polite people, polite society, and the guy came around and offered me some wine, and I said no, and he says, "Wine doesn't agree with you?" And I looked at him and I said, "Wine and I agree on everything." And you know, I was married at the time, and I got a big kick under the table from my normie wife. It's like, what, you know, why do you have to be an asshole? Why can't you just say no, thank you? But no, I mean, I hadn't planned to say it. In my defense, it was just this razor sharp mind of mine that came up with it. But I guess I didn't have to be an asshole at the time. But that's not the point. The point is that there was a time where I liked drinking with other people. And I liked drinking with other people. I liked smoking cocaine with other people. I would sit around a circle. There was myself, 4 other men, and 1 woman. And the 6 of us would sit in a circle and pass the pipe around. And, you know, I may not be a smart guy, but I'm an educated guy. And I know that every increment of time is equal to every other increment of time, unless you're in a black hole. But aside from that, every 60 seconds is equal to every other 60 seconds, except the longest 60 seconds is the time where I pass the crack pipe to that guy, and it's got to work its way all the way around the circle back to me. So, and that's when I had, shortly after that, the person who read chapter 5, that's where I had the spiritual awakening that she read about, which is, I've got to use alone. Because then it is always my turn. And this gave me a new freedom and a new happiness, such that I have never had before or since. And in my story, when I talk about drinking alone and using alone, I mean, you know the end is coming. I rarely heard in 19 years of sobriety anybody talking about, you know, being locked in a closet, smoking crack by themselves, and then said, you know, I really yearn for those days where I could have a spritzer at the bar with my friends. I mean, that's it. After we use alone, we either get sober or we die. And in my case, I got sober, but in the most bizarre way. This is why, I mean, you know, this is why I've done a panel down on Skid Row for 18 years on the 3rd Saturday of the month. And in the format of the panel, it says, we ask that you relate to the feelings being shared so that you can better identify with our stories. And that is so true, because the facts of my story are different than the facts of virtually everybody's I've heard, and everybody's is different than mine. But in my case, you know, I used alone for years, and then I got to the spot where I was telling lies to my friends, and my friends are scattered around the country, but they're friends with each other too. I told a crazy series of lies about getting in a jam on tax liens and commodities deals, none of which I know anything about, frankly. But they descended upon me, and they descended upon me to do an intervention on January 10th, 1986. Not the kind of choreographed Alvin Ailey kind of interventions they have today. This was my friend from Alabama, you know, this fucking cracker, and then a friend of mine, with all due respect to the people from the South, and a friend of mine who was a doctor from living then in Scottsdale, Arizona, and now the doctor, now that sounds like a pretty noble profession, especially you do an intervention. The only problem was he's a gynecologist, and my friend from Alabama had lived in California, and the only doctor he knew was an adolescent psychiatrist. So he took me to the adolescent psychiatrist. That guy threw me into a hospital, which is no longer there. It was called CPC Westwood, on the corner of Barrington and Olympic. And, you know, my gynecologist friend was the admitting doctor, and he wasn't licensed in California, only in Arizona. So the intake nurse, it was a Sunday. The intake nurse looks and says, "Well, you know, you're a gynecologist, and you're a gynecologist in Arizona." He says, "Look, admit this guy because his other doctor is a pediatrician." So you know, so that's it. So that's how I got sober. A hillbilly, a pediatrician, and a gynecologist. And you know, I knew nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous in this hospital. The first day that I was detoxed and ready to go to a meeting was the 12:30 meeting at the Alano Club on Pico. And it was Monday, and it was Martin Luther King's Day that year. And I knew so little about AA, I tried calling my insurance company to see whether or not AA was covered by my plan. And of course, the insurance company for the national holiday was closed, and so I begged off going. Everything I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, therefore, I have learned on the anvil of my own experience. I had no prejudices for or against, and everything I've learned because I've showed up. And I have showed up. I've gone to a meeting virtually every day of the 19 years. That's just the way I do it, you know. I do it because if I go to a meeting, I feel like I put myself in your care, and I'm relieved of the obligation of having to use self-will against alcoholism, because the alcoholism that I have is more powerful than I am. You know, in my family, everyone always talked about self-will and determination, and you know, the only way you get places is to have such a determination, and it works. The cunning, baffling, and powerful thing about that is it works, but it doesn't work against alcoholism in my case. And so I've had to put myself in your care. So if I go to a meeting, I feel like I'm no longer keeping myself sober. I am just showing up to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the alchemy is that I get kept sober. And so, you know, that's what has happened for me. The other thing is that for years I heard people say at meetings, you don't have to drink again if you don't want to. And that sounded like a powerful thing, an amazing thing. And then about 10 years ago at a meeting where I still go in the morning, and I still see this particular guy who's sober a few years less time than me, he said something that changed my sobriety, and it's something that people, look, I've heard it hundreds of times in the last 10 years, so I'm sure it was said in the first 9 years. He said, "You don't have to drink again if you do want to." And I hadn't heard it until that moment. And see, I'm a person that wants to drink often. When things don't go my way, I want to drink. I respect and I believe people that say something happens and they never thought about drinking. But that's not my case. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and show up at meetings all the time because I often want to drink. And I often want to drink with 19 years of sobriety and 15 years and 11 years when I had that. Because when things don't go my way, it's the only way I can feel differently. By the time I finish this sentence, if I drink, if I do some heroin, I'll feel different. It doesn't solve anything. I'll just feel different. And at that point, that's all I want. That's all I need. Because, as the big book says, you know, the alcoholism is centered here. It's not centered in the bottle. And that was something that took me a long time to understand. The sponsor I've had for about 18 years, he's sort of, you know, there are people that sort of have the Clancy line or the Chuck Chamberlain line, or, you know, a list of wonderful men and women who have been helpful to many alcoholics. And I guess in my way, it's Cubby, it's Hubert Selby Jr. In that my sponsor Merle was originally sponsored by Cubby, although he really met him because he used to have to keep Cubby drunk to keep him away from the heroin for the first 4 or 6 years of Cubby's sobriety. But nonetheless, and the reason that I so identify with him is he said things that are not necessarily right out of the big book, but are so meaningful to me. For example, he says, thinking is the lowest form of meditation. Ah, God. For somebody that gets paid to think, that is trained to think, that has exalted my thinking over almost anything else, to hear that is so powerful. And, you know, Merle also quotes Cubby as having said, of all the things to do with your mind, thinking seems to be the least useful. And, you know, these are things that I relate to. And what I've been able to do is take the steps, sometimes out of order. Oh yeah, there's another thing, and people always go, you know, the steps are written in order for a reason, and, you know, there's a passage in the 12 and 12, which I have found very helpful over the years in explaining, you know, the Da Vinci Code of the big book, sometimes a little arcane. And the 12 and 12 for me has been real helpful because it was written 15 years after the big book, and, you know, there's some practical application of the steps. But anyway, there's a passage in there that says for the person that's having a hard time with step 2, which is particularly my case, I'm an atheist, have him work the other steps. And, you know, in my case, steps 2 and 3 are really 11 and 12. That is, I don't believe half the things I do see. So I certainly don't believe things I don't see. And it took me having to do all the other steps before I could believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, much less turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God. And I do understand God. I understand God exists here. I understand that a power greater than myself exists for the hour and a half of this meeting. And, you know, in a couple of hours when there's nobody left in this room, it won't be a power greater than myself. But I put myself in the care of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the care of a loving God, which is this room, even though I don't believe in a creator. So, I mean, I just say this because there are certain things, there's certain orthodoxies that have proved true for me, and then other ones that I just wish to share that, you know, it hasn't happened exactly the way other people have said it. And so when I hear things like they're written in order for a reason, I don't know if they're written in order for a reason. They're written by Bill one night in bed, sitting up. So, but I'm just saying what happened for me is that I had to do everything else to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. There's another thing when I was hearing chapter 5, as I've been doing the last couple of years. You know, there are two passages that happen that occur in chapter 5 pretty close to one another. One is half measures availed us nothing. And, you know, I've never put the judgment on what a half measure is, but I know that the first person who took the first one-year cake today said something beautiful about honesty and integrity. And I know that if I have been slightly honest, halfway honest, it has availed me more than if I had been honest not at all. So when I hear half measures availed us nothing, maybe, you know, that has to do with drinking, but it doesn't have to do with my alcoholism. And similarly, there's that other one, which is some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, but the result was nil until we let go absolutely. And I hear this, and it's very forbidding, like you get nothing. But, you know, when I have let go, even the slightest, even with a pinky, the results have happened. They may not have happened as it would be if I were fully honest all the time, if I would practice these principles perfectly, but they have happened. And so, you know, maybe the results are a little bit more than nil, but anyway, that's just the way it happened for me. You know, I was at a meeting a few months ago, and someone said, you know, it's not enough to be honest around here. It's not even enough to be rigorously honest around here. You gotta be ruthlessly honest. And I thought, oh, fuck. I've been 19 years, I was just trying to be honest. Now I gotta be rigorously honest and ruthlessly honest. What is ruthlessly honest? Without ruth. Recklessly honest, without, recklessly honest, without wreck. But I don't know, I just wanted to say that, you know, Merle always says, you know, Stevie, you don't have to believe everything you think. And man, you know, that's amazing to me. Of course I have to believe everything I think, because it happened as a result of thought. You know, I feel like it's worth something because I thought about it. And I will say that virtually no pain that I have endured over the years, no distress has come as a result of underthinking something. There have been a couple of professional times where, you know, maybe if I had carefully analyzed the situation, I might have come to a different result, but only in a professional context. Nothing having to do with my alcoholism, and nothing personally I've never experienced anything bad because I underthought something, only because I overthought it, overanalyzed it, played moves that don't exist. So I've learned what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, not intending to even stay sober this kind of length. I really wanted to just go back to the weekends, just like I started out so many years ago. And it hasn't happened like that. You know, I've been married in sobriety. You know, I met my wife when I was 2 years sober. There are a couple of people here from Chicago who actually know my wife's mom. My wife is not in the program. My former wife is not in the program. But her mother is. Her mother is 32 years sober. And when Harriet met me, she said, oh, you know, she called her mother, and she goes, oh, I met some guy, and she said what I do for work and all that stuff. And she goes, oh, yeah, and he's a heroin addict. So her mother says, didn't take the bait, said, well, how long is he sober? She said, he's 2 years sober. And she said, you don't get involved with anyone with less than 10 years of sobriety. So when I had 10 years of sobriety, I invited my mother-in-law out from Chicago to give me a cake. And I asked her to give me a cake at the Palisades meeting. And it's a Sunday morning meeting. My kids were kind of young then, and she came out, and that particular night was a great speaker. Morning was a good speaker, and I said, "So Diane, how did you like the meeting?" She goes, "Well, first, there's all this reading. Then you have a piano player, and everybody gets chips, and everybody claps, and then the birthdays one after another, and then you have a coffee break, and there's bagels, and there's cream cheese, and there's fruit boats, and there's 6 kinds of coffee. You people spend so much time congratulating yourselves, it's a wonder anybody gets sober around here." So, but I did have 10 years of sobriety, and then she was a widow, and some years after that, she met a guy, and she called my wife up and said, she says, "What are you guys doing for Memorial Day?" And she said, "Nothing." She said, "Well, we'd like to come out." And my wife said, "Who's we?" She goes, "I met somebody." She said, "Did you meet him at the art museum?" Because she was a docent there. No. I said, "Did you meet him at the symphony?" No. She goes, "I met him at one of my meetings." So my wife said, "How long is he sober?" She said, 2 years. So be careful about those pointing those fingers. I have had to, this marriage has ended, and I must say that there are times where I feel like I can't endure the discomfort and uncertainty without a drink. And I don't know how, I don't know if I'll stay sober through this. I like to think that going to a meeting every day keeps me close, and speaking keeps me close. But that alcoholism comes up in so many ways that I never expected. Hurt feelings. There's certain nights that the kids are with me and certain nights they're not. And the nights that they're with me, they call my former wife often 3 or 5 times a night. And the nights that they're with her, they don't call at all. And I get so sad. My feelings get so hurt, and I just feel like, man, I just got to take the pain away. And sometimes I'm not sure which step it is. I know that I'm powerless over them. I know that in that regard my life is unmanageable, but sometimes I don't want to take the steps. I share this just to say that I'm a person that wants to drink sometimes. And I often think, well, I'm sober a long time, I should, putting judgments on. Merle said that once that Cubby told him when he was newly sober, he says, around here, we change our language. And Merle was quizzical, and he said, he goes, no, I don't mean like fuck and shit and cocksucker. No, those are just words that we use. I'm talking about we change our language. We get rid of judgment. We cast aside that kind of thing. That's what I mean by changing our language. And, I really, I try to do it, but sometimes I come up short, and lately that's that's what's been happening. I sometimes think, you know, when I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I came in and I just thought, man, I just wanna be free. I just wanna not drink today. That would be enough. And you know, sometimes now, after all this time, it is enough. It wasn't enough at times, and now it isn't enough sometimes at times, because my feelings aren't factual, but I don't put them up as collateral for my actions, but sometimes they feel as real as anything can be. And when I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a guy at a meeting who said that he had a piece of wood over his bed that his grandfather had given him many, many years before. And when he went to high school and he went away to college and went to graduate school, he took this piece of wood because it was a memento, and it had this saying on it. And then he got sober, and he thought, this is the same saying that was over his bed all the time. And he said it took him more than 3 years. When he would hold hands at the end, they'd say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yosemite National Park. And I went, that's a guy I can relate to, a guy who knew nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, who has learned everything he has learned in Alcoholics Anonymous about dealing with other people and understanding myself. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be able to share. I know two things. I know how to get drunk, and I know how to stay sober. And you know, sometimes that's enough. And I guess tonight is one of those times. So I might be early, but I'm going to stop now. Thanks.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. what that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.